All right. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for another live online learning session. Today, we are going to be looking at Pro Tools first. We're going to be looking at basic mixing. But before we jump right into the webinar, I'm just going to go over a couple of points with all of you. So first and foremost, this webinar is being recorded, but you'll notice that your audio is muted. However, you are able to ask questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, or if you're watching this from a streaming platform, you can go ahead and leave your questions in the comments. I will be checking for those throughout the webinar. You can also raise your hand to let us know that you're out there. If you can hear me now, tell me where you're from in the comments or in the Q&A section. All of these recorded sessions are posted to our website at avid.com, so keep an eye out for those. Today, we have again with us the lovely Andy Hagerman. Andy is a lifelong musician. He is a master instructor with us here at Avid, and he also works on curriculum development. So, Mr. Hagerman, it's all yours.
Mr. Hagerman, whoo.
Yes.
Finally, I'm getting the respect I deserve. Outstanding. Let me share my screen. All right. Yes, Andy Hagerman here. It's just now midnight in Tokyo, and we're going to talk a little bit about basic mixing. This is the fourth in a series of Pro Tools First webinars, and just to recap these so that you'll know what to look for in our blogs page. The first one we did was getting started with Pro Tools First, and then the second session was with creating new tracks, working with tracks, and basic editing was the last one that we did, and then this one we're going to talk about basic mixing. So the whole point of this is that if you're a Pro Tools First person, you're probably getting started with Pro Tools. Maybe you're getting started with DAWs in general. We just want you to get started on the right foot. And after this is done, along with the other ones, you can go on to the Avid blogs page and go on to the online learning, live online learning section, and find what you're looking for. So the topics we're going to talk about here are signal flow. We're going to talk about the edit tools with there. We're going to talk about time-based versus typo there versus dynamic-based effects routing, and then we'll talk about subgroups. And those are going to be the main three topics. Now, here's the thing about mixing. Mixing is a study. Some people will say it's an art that can take decades to refine. So we're not going to take you through becoming a fantastic mixer in 1.5 hour session. It's going to take a lot of practice. So I was thinking about what I want to focus on, and it reminded me of a joke that somebody asked me. What are the three most important things about mixing? Signal flow, signal flow, signal flow. And it's true. If you understand how signal flow works inside of Pro Tools, you can get anything to happen. And if you don't understand how signal flow works, you're not going to be able to get anything to happen. So this is the fundamental understanding that you have to have in order to get mixing to happen. And I wanted to take a look at a normal audio track's signal flow. And you can see here I've got a little bit of a block diagram. The first thing you have on a track is an input, and that can be a clip on a track. It can be an input on an aux track or an audio track. The next thing that you have, the second thing here, and you can see here I've got a blue box around it, is a thing called an insert. Now, an insert interrupts the signal as it comes from the input, and it interrupts it 100%. So the signal comes down and it goes into something and is processed. It can be an external processor, but for DAWs, it's more likely going to be a plug-in effect. So if I wanted to put, for example, a compressor or an EQ effect on a track, the place I'm going to put it is in my inserts. And the inserts happen immediately after the clips on a track or the input. The next thing that you're going to have is a thing called a send. And the sends are right below the inserts. And there are two kinds of sends. You'll see in position number 3 over here, there's a pre-fader send. That's the first thing we're going to talk about. A send makes a copy of the signal, and it will route that copy of the signal to something else. And it can route it to either an interface, an output, or it can route it to a bus for internal routing. Now, a pre-fader send is typically used for things like headphone mixes. So if you're doing some recording, you've got your headphones on and you're listening to the mix so you can play your guitar or your bass or your whatever, you will typically use a send to get that signal to your headphone mix. And the kind of send that you're going to use is called a pre-fader send. Now, right after the pre-fader send is the volume fader, which is this little guy right here. So it's a volume fader which allows us to control the gain or the level of an individual track. Then after the volume fader, we have another send, which occupies this same space here. And we'll talk about this more later. And a post-fader send is a copy, just like the copy we talked about before. We can go to interface or a bus. It's a copy that I would route somewhere else. But the difference is that a post-fader send, the level that comes out that send is affected by the volume. So if the track is low, I bring down the volume to make the track low, well then the level of the signal that's being sent will also be low. Okay? And we'll typically use sends, post-fader sends, we'll use those for basically anything other than your headphone mix. So if you want to add like a reverb or you want to add a delay to a track, you're going to use post-fader sends, and we'll show you how to do that today. Then finally, panning allows you to position the signal in a left or right space between the left and right speakers. If you're dealing with surround sound with Pro Tools Ultimate, you can go as high as 5.1, 7.1, and Dolby Atmos. So you can go crazy with pan, but for Pro Tools First, the maximum number of output channels is stereo. So that pan will allow you to position the signal left or right and to place them in space. And then finally, the output of the track. So let's go ahead and take a look at how that is implemented inside of Pro Tools. So here I've got a song, and I'll play the song just a little bit so you can kind of get a sense of it. So I'll start off. It starts kind of quiet and then comes back up. Okay, we'll stop there. Just you get a sense. Now, the first thing you're going to notice is the volume on the lead vocal is a little bit low, and in fact, the lead vocal track, which is this top track up here, is where we're going to start our focus. And what I'm going to do right now, I'm in the edit window. Now you can do mixing in the edit window. You can go ahead here and you can see I've got, if I click on the small little fader icon to the immediate right of the output selector, you'll see I've got an output window which gives me volume and pan controls. But for me, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off in the mix window just so you can kind of see it in more of a mixer kind of context. And I'm going to, first of all, I'll select an area here. There we go. So this is the area that I've got. I'm going to turn on loop playback so that when I play, it's just going to loop over and over again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to solo the track so this track is all we're going to hear. And I'll go over to my mix window. Great, fantastic. Now, if we take a listen to it, in a second it'll come up. Now, you'll see up here that I've got, let me go back into the, yeah, we'll find. You can see here that I've got my inserts up here. And I've got, in this particular case, I've got 5 insert positions. I can put 5 effects there if I wanted to. If I want to put more effects, I can go down here to the view selector and I can add 5 more slots of inserts, but I don't need them for what I'm going to do here. So I'll go ahead and hide these and I'll save some space. Now, the first thing that I want to do is I want to take a look at my EQ. So I'm going to add an EQ effect over here, and I want to kind of bring you into my world of how I deal with equalization. I'm going to use the 7-band EQ, and I'm going to show you a little trick here while I'm doing this. So if I'll bring this up, and I'll go ahead and play this. The first thing that I typically do is I cut everything that's low that is unneeded. So I'll turn on a low, high-pass filter, which is a low cut. You can see here that now if I bypass the effect, you can see here it doesn't make a whole lot of difference, and that's intentional. A lot of times, and a lot of mixers will do this, a lot of times what you get is unwanted low-frequency noise that you don't really hear on an individual track, but if you take a lot of tracks together, that low-frequency noise can interfere with things like drums and bass. So the whole trick behind this is to cut low frequencies until you hear a difference and then back off a little bit. We're just making sure we cut all the stuff that isn't important to the sound. It's called subtractive EQ. Now, one of the things that people will do is they also want to perhaps boost a frequency that they like, so that it cuts through the mix. And the way that a lot of people will do it is they'll raise up a band of EQ and they'll narrow the Q. And what they'll do is they'll move it around trying to find a good or bad frequency. This is called sweeping the band. Sweeping the frequency band. And I'm going to show you a different way to do this. The reason why I don't like this workflow is because when you raise the signal, you're going to wind up possibly clipping. Also, if you do this too much, your brain will start to get a little bit confused. So I'm going to show you a workflow tip that I really like, and every professional that I show this to also digs this. I'm going to go ahead and start playback again. Give it a second for the vocal to start in. Okay, now what I want to do is find a good frequency where that vocal kind of pops. I'm going to hold down Shift and Control on a Mac, and it's Shift and Start on a Windows computer. And now I'm going to move any knob, and what happened is it, instead of boosting the band, it soloed it. Let's get that. I'm going to find it better. There we go. There we go. And that brings out the character. And now I let go. I unsoloed the band, and now all I have to do is bring that up. And let's see how that sounds. Let me change my loop here. That's okay. Yeah, that works for me. So what I'm doing is very subtly finding and sculpting the sound that I want. And I'm going to do that on an insert so that this process is going to work on 100% of the signal. So I'm not blending a wet and dry mix of EQ. You just typically don't do that sort of thing. The next thing that I've got over here, right underneath this, is a compressor, and I've bypassed it so we're not hearing the effect. One of the things to know about inserts is they are processed in series. So the EQ happens first, it's completely processed, and then the signal is passed on to the next insert. In this case, I put a compressor in here. So let's go ahead and bypass this, and I'm going to use that compressor to kind of manage my levels just a little bit. When the walls are caving in my head. All right, so now that's starting to get pretty good. Let me go ahead and unsolo this. So now we're starting to get in the ballpark here. Let me make a better selection here. There we go. And if I bypass these, I can right-click and choose bypass to bypass a plugin, or I can hold down Command and Control and click, and it will make a plugin inactive. So there's two different ways that you can deal with things. So this is with no plugins on. This is the original one. That's with the EQ. And that's with the compressor. Now, everything you do with inserts is going to process 100% of the signal. But that's not typically where I'm going to put things like reverbs and delays. Reverbs and delays, what I want to do with them is I want to blend a wet and a dry signal. In other words, an unaffected and an affected signal. And that's where we're going to go into sends. And if I go back to my mix window, there we are. You can see here I've got my sends. And again, just like inserts, I've got 5 send slots that I'm seeing now. But if I need more, I can get 5 more send slots by clicking the display down here at the bottom and choosing sends F through J. So I can get up to 10 sends, but I don't need that right now. I just need the 5 is fine. Now, I've got another track that I've already created for myself, which is a delay on an aux track. So this is an auxiliary input track. We learned about these tracks in an earlier webinar. An aux track is just like an audio track, except for it can't hold a clip. Okay, so a lot of the things that we'll use aux tracks for, one of the important things that we'll use aux tracks for, is a place to hold time-based effects like delays and reverbs. And you can see up here on one of the inserts, I've got the mod delay plugin. I've got it all set up. The only problem is I've got no way to get my signal from my vocal track to this effects return, okay, to this effects aux. A send is going to help me out with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a send. Now, I could, if I wanted to, choose a bus number. I could choose any one of the unused buses as the output for that send. Then I could go to the aux track. I could choose that same bus as the insert for the send. But here's the trick. If I go over to my send, I can make life a little bit easier. And instead of going on the send, there's sends. I'm going to go to bus 1516. And I will change this to bus 1516. There we go. And now what's going to happen is I've got this send indicator. Now, the send indicator is born with the send all the way down, and that's a safety precaution so that you don't inadvertently create any kind of a feedback loop. But what I'm going to do, just to start off, is I want to raise this fader up to unity, up to 0. And one of the ways to do that is hold down the Option key or the Alt key on a Windows computer and click on the fader, and it'll jump right up to 0. Now, here's what's happening. Is the signal is going through the EQ, going through the compressor, then it's going to this post-fader send. We know that it's a post-fader send because the pre-light is not on. If I click this, it now becomes a pre-fader send, but it's going to be a post-fader send. And that post-fader send is going to send a copy of the signal through bus 15 and 16, and the input of my delay track, of my effects return, is set to the same bus. So now if I open up this effect over here, we're going to hear a delay placed on the lead vocal. That might be just a little bit too much delay. So you can change the level that's getting sent to the delay. You can either, and there's 2 different ways you can do it. You can either bring the level down here on your send, which lowers the level of the signal that's going to this track, or if I wanted to leave this up, and I'll just go ahead and do it now, I can reduce the volume level of my delay. Either way will work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this way down to nothing. And a little bit goes a long way. Too much of it gets distracting, but this thickens things up nicely. Now I've got a background vocal as well. So if I go to my edit window, let's go to where there's some background vocals happening. We'll go with this, and I'll solo my background vocal tracks as well. I want to put the same send on these two tracks. It's easily done. Here's a trick. You can make a copy of a send by holding down the Option key or the Alt key on a Windows computer and just drag that send onto the other tracks that you want. So right now, I've got an identical send on each one of these tracks. And if I wanted to, I could say, you know what, on my background vocals, I want that send not to be as much signal going to the delay. So I could bring down that on my background vocals and leave my main vocals fairly lush. So let's take a listen to it again. And if we listen to that in context of the mix, so this is actually working out pretty cool so far. Now, the last thing that we're going to do is I'm going to talk about a thing called subgroups. And the subgroup, let me go back to my PowerPoint. A subgroup is also going to be typically an aux track. So we've used an aux track previously to put a reverb on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have an aux track be the recipient of the outputs of individual tracks. And I've already set this up in my mix. I've got an aux track that is taking all of my vocals and all of my guitars and all of my keyboards and all of my drums, so that each one of these aux tracks, each one of these subgroups, now gives me control over all of the levels. So what I'm going to do is I'll go back here and I'll show you how I've done this. You can see now my main vocals and all my background vocals are going out bus 1 and 2. Okay? I'm going to take my vocal delay. I'm also going to send this out bus 1 and 2. And the bus input 1 and 2 is going to another aux track called Vox Sub. And what I'm going to do, because my vocals overall, they sound good on their own, but they're too low in the mix. So I'm going to go ahead and start playback. So real quickly, this has allowed me to, if I hold down solo over here, this allows me to change the overall levels of all of my member tracks. So I've got a Vox sub, and the Vox sub track is accepting a bus signal coming from all the vocals. My guitars, these blue tracks, are going to bus 3 and 4, which is feeding my guitar sub. All of my keyboards are going out of bus 5 and 8, which is feeding another bus, which controls all of my synthesizers. I've got strings that are going out bus 7 and 8, feeding the string sub, and so on and so forth. And all of these then for the drums, I've got drums are going out of bus 11 and 12, and that is the input of 11 and 12 is going to my drum sub. So I've got, basically, I can control the entire mix from just 5 or 6 aux tracks rather than dealing with a whole bunch of tracks. So if I wanted to, I could make my drums louder or softer in the mix. I could change my drums just by... Now there's no drums. So your subgroups are a way for you to take control over multiple tracks with one single fader. Now you can go one step further, and I know we've got about 5 more minutes, and just let me show you one final thing that I do with subgroups. So if we take a look over here, you'll see that I've got subgroups of all of my individual tracks. Then what I do is I make another subgroup of all my subgroups. So these are all my different individual sonic food groups, and then they go to another aux track where I can put my mastering effects and I can put a compressor on the entire mix and make it sound nice and pretty. And this one at the bottom is a subgroup of all my other subgroups. And all of these tracks are aux tracks. Now, the final thing that I'll show you before we open up for questions is with your subgroups, the one thing you want to do is you want to do a thing called solo safe. Now, solo safe, I'm going to unsolo safe this track. So here I've got my vocal track. And if I solo my vocals, if you solo any track, what happens to the other tracks? Well, they go mute. So right now you can see I've got vocals happening here, but I'm not hearing my vocal subgroup because my vocal subgroup is mute. If I wanted to hear it, I could go ahead and solo it, and now I'm hearing it. Another way that I can do this, maybe a little bit easier, is do a thing called solo safe. And all I have to do there is hold down Command and click on the solo button, boom, and it goes gray. And now even if you solo a track, any solo saved track will not go mute. So that's kind of the basics of the signal flow aspect of mixing. And like I said, there's a lot more we can talk about mixing. There's 5 more webinars we could do talking about different aspects of mixing. But the first step for mixing, signal flow, signal flow, signal flow. And with that, Lainey, I think I'm ready for questions if there are any.
Okay, well, let's see. Stacy asks, why not put effects on the master fader? Is there a reason to do it on the last group, as you've mentioned?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So, so you see here, and I'll go over here, and this is something we didn't have time to talk about, but if you take a look, I've got all of my subgroups going to my main sub, okay? And this is where I've got an EQ on my entire mix, and I've got a very gentle compressor on my final mix. Now, here's the reason why I put it on an aux track, because remember, signal flow, signal flow, signal flow, is that these inserts are pre-fader. So if I bring down this fader or bring it up, it won't affect the level of the signal that's feeding these effects. Now, what we didn't talk about, which you've asked about, is why not put them on a master fader? The reason why I don't put them on a master fader is because on a master fader, your inserts are post-fader, which means that any change you make in volume will change the level of the signal going to your plugins. And in the case of a compressor, that can make a big difference. That if you create fade-ins and fade-outs with your master fader, which a lot of people do, that will cause your compressor to kick in and kick out, which is not the effect that I want. So usually what I'll do is I will have all of my subgroups routed to an aux track because it has pre-fader inserts, and then I'll control my mix with a master fader. And if I want to, I'll put metering, maybe a limiter on the inserts of a master fader. Why? Because specifically on master faders, inserts are post fader. That's a fantastic question. That was Stacy, was it?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for asking.
Okay, do we have any other questions? I'm going to give all of you 30 to 40 seconds to type your questions. I know there's a little bit of a delay, so I don't want to miss anything. But I'm not seeing any other questions right now on streaming platforms. Let's see. We have a diverse crowd today. We have people tuning in from Jakarta, Trinidad, nice. Lots of different fun places. No other questions?
That means I've done my job well. Yay.
Yes. Come on. We love questions, though. Okay, here's one.
We do love questions.
should I remove those effects before I send it out to the mastering engineer?
So that's another fantastic question. So now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to take a privilege and I'm going to give you my opinion. Um, a mastering engineer is different than being a master engineer. A master engineer is somebody who's mastered the craft of mixing, right? But mastering itself is a completely different thing than mixing. Okay, and I would say that if your budget will allow it, hire a professional mastering engineer. And in the case of sending something out to a mastering engineer, anything that you would, so I would probably take this EQ. I might leave the EQ on, but I'll take the compressor maybe off to give a little bit more bandwidth and headroom to the mastering engineer. And certainly, if I was to put, for example, if I was to put a limiter or something on my master fader, I would definitely take that off, because the more stuff that you put on your main sub and your main master fader, these two tracks right over here, these two tracks, the more stuff that I put on here, the more I'm limiting the options of my mastering engineer. So yes, I generally will be very sparing and make sure that I'm putting stuff in there that will not get in the way of the mastering process. It's a great
And
question.
I have someone asking, do all auxiliary channels have to be on pre-fader?
So basically, right now, do all yeah, if he's asking are all auxiliary tracks inserts pre-fader, then the answer is yes. I'm not sure if I understand the question.
Yeah, that's all the question said. All auxiliary channels have to be on pre-fader, question mark.
Yeah, an aux track and an audio track have exactly the same signal flow. The only difference between an aux track and an audio track is that an audio track can hold an audio clip and an aux track can't, which makes it great for things like the delay and for creating subgroups.
Awesome. Let's see. Any last questions? Okay, I'm not seeing anything. So I'm gonna move forward. We haven't met our 30-minute mark at least. So
There we go.
let's see. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything right now. So I'm just gonna go over the next couple of sessions that we are going to be offering. So next week we have 3 sessions, same times, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern. Tuesday we have Media Composer, working with color correction. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can sign up on the website, or you can join again via Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. And then Wednesday we have another Maestro News session. I know a couple people had asked when the next one was. That one will be on Wednesday, and we're going to be looking at automation. So with that being said, thank you all so much for tuning in. Andy, as always, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
We
Thank you.
appreciate you. And we'll see you all next time. Thank you.